Hey, hi Michael, can you able to hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Awesome. So let's give 10 more seconds and we'll get started. So good afternoon and good morning everybody. Thank you for joining today's SQL Pass Analytics virtual group session. So today we are going to present data preparation in Power BI with the Dataflow. So for initially we have few introductory slides related to Pass and then we will start our session with Michael. So past business analytics virtual chapter is, giving the sessions from last 7 years, and every month we have a monthly sessions, and we have more than 100 attendees joining all over the world for this virtual group. So definitely you must plan for past SQL Summit, and this time it is in Seattle, November 6 to 9. And as you know, this is the one of the largest conference for the technical professionals for all the SQL Server and complete Microsoft data platform. With the virtual group, you will get one code. That code you can use, and you will get some dollar off on your actual attendees mode. And we always have requirement for call for speaker, so you can note down this link and you can fill this form, and we will review the profile, we will review the session details, and we'll get you as a speaker in our virtual group. So this is the code. If you are wanted to join Pass Summit, you can use this code displayed on the screen, VGDIS7SHP, and you will get $150 off of the actual summit cost, and we'll be able to see you there. So Pass is basically, help and support and connect the people. So if you are looking for the sponsorship even for this type of sessions, please uh, send an email to sponsorship at Pass, and we will get back to you. Pass also launched the Career Center website where you can view jobs, you can post jobs, as well as you can have a resume there. And mostly this website is only related to data platform and some other jobs as well. If you want to looking for help and sponsorship, definitely connect with us. So these are few virtual group webinars. These are upcoming. You can see there are more than 50 virtual groups presenting all over the world, and you can view those sessions online just by sitting in the home. I really like that. We have Power BI, PowerShell, Cloud, DBA fundamental sessions. These are the various past virtual group. Upcoming SQL Saturdays. These SQL Saturdays are really helpful. These are one day full-fledged session where all the experts from industry, they present 1 hour sessions in local events. So you can see if you are nearby location, you can note down and visit the nearest SQL Saturday on these specific dates. So Perspective is our premium sponsor this time, and they deliver BI very fast. And this is their slide. If you want to know more about the past, definitely join the past. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and the LinkedIn. And after this introductory slide from virtual group, I would like to hand over to Michael.
All right. Can you see me, Michelle?
We can
You
see
can see
your
my
screen,
screen.
Michael.
Great stuff. Thanks. All right. Welcome, everybody. Today we'll be speaking about data preparation from Power BI, having a look at a brand new feature called Dataflows. Before we get started, I just want to sort of start with a disclaimer. Okay, so Dataflows are still in private preview, and really what this means is that the product is still in development. We don't know what the final product would look like. We don't know when it will be released. I also don't have access to all the functionality because obviously I don't have access to premium capacity. It's a little bit expensive for one man. But just keep in mind these things. All right. So a little bit about myself before we get going. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm an independent BI consultant and trainer out of South Africa. I run a company called SQL SA. I also run the Johannesburg SQL Server user group. I'm also a co-lead of the Business Analytics virtual chapter, which is what you're watching today. And I've also been made a Microsoft MVP. So yeah, let's dive in. I'm sure all of us know that Power BI is a fantastic tool, and it's really taken the market by storm. And one of the reasons for this is the simplicity at which it is able to do its self-service preparation. So this self-service ability of Power BI has essentially allowed it to take over a large section of the market, and the self-service portion has really allowed us to begin by sort of reducing a dependence on IT. Okay, and what this really means is that when business users need new reports, they don't need to go to IT anymore. Okay, and this really means that we have empowered end users, and an empowered end user means that they are able to connect to their own data, they're able to shape their own reports, and essentially self-service. Okay, and this ultimately leads to faster time to value. Okay, and what this means is that within the time of, let's say, I could probably start in the morning and have a sort of fully deployed report. This is probably less time than you would need to actually go and create, so you probably set up a meeting with IT in the first place. But with all this power, there comes a couple of downsides. Okay, and the first of these is if we've got a big team, and let's say I've got a marketing team, I've got my operations team, and a sales team. Chances are each one of these teams are working by themselves, and they're gonna each connect to probably the same data sets. They're going to sort of curate each of these data sets, and they're going to be performing what is essentially the same work over and over again. And this obviously leads to a lot of duplicated effort. The duplicated effort is not great from an organizational side because that is just wasted time. That could have been spent more productively. One of the an additional sort of downside of duplicated effort is that we might end up with inconsistent results. And this isn't to say it's wrong, although incorrect results are one of the possibilities. But sometimes how a marketing person might view data is different to the way an operational person might view data. So the way we filter our results, the way we transform and cleanse our data might be different. Okay, and then finally we end up with some inefficiencies. Okay, and this is not necessarily from the organizational side, but was being directly in the reporting services portal. If we have 5 different reports and each one of these reports is being freshed multiple times per day, then this is hitting our operational sources more often. Okay, but these are essentially not new problems. Okay, so if we think about traditional BI, we've had a problem of trying to create a unified version of the truth. Okay, and this unified version of the truth usually came in the form of a data warehouse. Now, I'm going to use the term data warehouse somewhat loosely, as data warehouses can be the rational star schemas that we're probably most familiar with. They can be simple ODSs. They can also be data lakes. The emergence of big data has seen data lakes become more prevalent. Okay, and all of these are valid sources of that single version of the truth. But creating these data warehouses hasn't actually been our challenge. Where our real challenge is how do we get data into those data marts? Okay, and this is a process that we've often called ETL. Okay, and it stands basically for extract, transform, load. And this is how we get data from our source, okay, which is the extract portion. Transform is how do we cleanse that data? Do we filter out bad records? How how do we maybe reshape the data if we have to, and then loading it into our store, whether that be our rational star schema or sort of blob storage in the case of a data lake. So this sort of end-to-end life cycle is fairly common in the traditional BI, but we don't have this in Power BI currently. So should we, we've got this rich visualization layer, but how do we provide that single version of the truth that sort of organizations require? And this is where this new product comes in. Okay, so what is a data flow? And I'm going to refer to a term that Microsoft has used originally. It's a lightweight term to describe what a data flow, but I quite liked it. It was the idea that what we've got is a schematized data lake. Now, if you're somewhat familiar with what a data lake is, you might recognize that this is an oxymoron, okay? Because a data lake it's a store of data where we store data in its original format. It essentially doesn't have a schema, and it's only semi-structured, or perhaps it is fully structured. Okay, but this isn't what we've got here. We've got the schematized data lake, and a fellow named Matthew Roche, who's one on the Power BI CAT team, sort of described it quite nicely when he said that what Microsoft's trying to do is that they're trying to create a data lake, but with little guide rails so that you can't drown. So what we've ended up with is this. So essentially what we've ended up with is this lake where we can go and create curated data sets without our users sort of drowning. And this concept of drowning is pretty important, because what happens when we've got a sort of unmanaged data lake is that everybody just goes and ingests all this data. We don't necessarily vet it. It's not cleansed. It's untrustworthy. And if users can't trust the data that they're connecting to, well, then we might as well not have a data lake. Okay, and this sort of chaos is often called a data swamp. Okay, so a data swamp is something that we want to avoid. So we're going to use these rails, and we're going to sort of begin to use data flows. All right, so data flows are this managed way of viewing data, and these guide rails are provided through what is called the common data model. Okay, so what is the common data model? Well, very simply, the common data model is an open source definition of standard entities. And what that means is, for years, Microsoft, through their sort of dynamics teams, have been helping businesses sort of model their operations. Okay, and this includes the identification of key entities within their objects. So these could be things like clients. These could be things like sales. They could be products. All of these things that we know make up our data warehouses. They've kind of created standard versions of this. But the risk is that obviously Microsoft doesn't know all the businesses. Okay, so in order to be able to cater for everybody, we also need to be extensible. Okay, so we're not locked into a single model. Instead, we can use the model where it's available, and then we can extend it where possible. Now, if we wanted to have a look at what that model looked like, I'm just going to go. Essentially, Microsoft. Everybody knows that Microsoft probably bought GitHub. I actually believe that's hopefully it's been approved by the Europeans today. And Microsoft have gone and created an open source project called the Microsoft CDM, or the Common Data Model, and they have made all of these entities available. Okay, so this is the CDM project hosted in GitHub, and there's a couple of things I just want to walk you through here. So the first one is very quickly. I'm going to go to the docs option. They have a poster over here. So the poster sort of gives you a guide as to what this is. Now, at the core of the common data model is this idea of an entity, and we said that these are standard entities, okay, within business. Okay, so Microsoft have identified them, and these all exist under this idea of the core entities. Okay, but certain industries have additional requirements. So if we think about things like the healthcare industry, we have new entities such as patient, practitioner, devices. For talent management, we could have departments, job positions. for sales, we have things like competitors. So this is some of the extensibility that you get within the common data model. Now, this isn't the extensibility I mentioned earlier. We'll discuss that in a second, but these are just some of the entities that we have available. Now, if we come back to the model, we're going to have a quick look at one of these entities. So I'm going to quickly go to the schema documents and click on core. And here you will see we've got a full listing of all the entities that Microsoft has identified. So this is a simple table. It does have some CSS problems over here. Okay, but essentially what we can see is that these are some of the entities that Microsoft has identified, such as an account. They're given a description. So this is, for example, an account is a business that represents a customer or potential customer, the company that is billed or the business transaction. Okay, but obviously we need a system to be able to consume this. So essentially all of these entities are actually defined in JSON. So if I click on the entity itself, you'll actually see the JSON document that defines it. So here we can see essentially we've got the idea of an account. It has various properties. If I scroll down, okay, I should begin to see some of the categories that we've got. So you'll see that over here we've got we have sort of the account category code as well as descriptions as to what goes into these entities. Now this isn't perhaps very human friendly. So as part of the documentation, you'll see that there's a mapping to the dynamics definition of this. So and this is a bit more human friendly, made available via the Microsoft Docs portal. And here you can see all of the attributes that we manage. So we saw earlier things like the account category, but we can sort of drill down in something. Let's just choose account name, and it'll discuss the data types, give it a description. It'll tell you if it's required or not. Sort of a max length. All of these sort of things that you would traditionally have defined in some sort of data dictionary. Okay, so that's a sort of a quick look at the common data model, okay, or the definitions of it. So we said that it's open sourced, okay, we've seen it available in GitHub. We know that it's extensible. We'll see how that happens in a sec, but we've also got this idea of having this structural semantic consistency across the application and deployments. Now that's a very long way in saying that this common data model is not just used for data flows. Microsoft are using this concept across many of their products. Okay, and to understand this, if we think of the common data model as the generic sort of structure that we model all of these entities on, then we know that we have the common data service for analytics, okay, or as it is now known, Dataflow. So the common data service was the original name for the product. It has changed names into Dataflow. Common data service for analytics obviously made sense when we looked at when we knew that we had the common data model. But it did cause a little bit of confusion because in addition to the common data service for analytics, we also have the common data service for apps. Okay, now the common data service for apps is the technology that actually sits behind products like Dynamics. Okay, so Dynamics is an ERP system, and in that ERP system, they also define things like clients, accounts, products. Okay, so what we have here is a shared definition of data between these two environments. And what this really means is that we can point to one environment, we can point to one environment, which is our operational environment, and just ingest the data because we know that there is a consistent meaning and definition of all the data that we pull across. Okay, so these are two of the legs that exist in the the common data service ecosystem, if you want to call it that. The final portion, which hasn't been released just yet, or at least not to my knowledge, is the Power BI Insight apps. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow a business to be able to just point at a repository of data, whether this be their Dynamics infrastructure or perhaps Salesforce, and it'll have known schemas and known ways of importing these sets of data. So what that means is we point at our data, we can just suck it straight into our data flows, okay, where our data is persisted. And then we've got pre-canned reports that sit on top of this data, which means that we can go from insights, which would usually take months in a sort of traditional BI environment, to what could actually be an hour. Okay. Now I haven't seen that experience, so I won't exactly sort of validate that just yet. Okay, but so this describes the common data services ecosystem, but we're just going to have a quick look at the sort of current Power BI architecture. So if we think about Power BI, and this can be sort of both the on-prem or the cloud version. Okay, so we've got reports and dashboards. Okay, so this is our visual layer. We have our data sets, and this is where our data is stored in the in-memory sort of component. So this is where your sort of your data model sits. And then finally, we've got gateways and connectors. Okay, and gateways and connectors are how we connect to data and how we ingest this data. Now, the introduction of sort of data flows is going to bring about two new layers to this. Okay, and the first one is the data flow itself, and this is where we get to perhaps a more sort of technical definition of what a data flow is. Okay, so data flow consists of three portions. The first portion of this is metadata. Okay, and this is data that describes what is in the set. So if we think about the JSON file that we looked at earlier in the from the common data model, it describes the sort of entity's name. It describes the columns that it would have in this table. It describes the data types that we would find, as well as any other constraints that we have on this data. In addition to that, we have a query definition. So this is a definition of how we actually populate that data. And in our case, this is actually going to be an M query, okay? Because data flows are going to use M, which is Power Queries, and this is what we've been using natively in Power BI for years. Okay, and then the final section is the final portion is the data itself. Now the data is actually stored as a CSV file within blob storage, and essentially what this allows us to do is go and map these columns that sit in the blob storage through to this data flow. But this gives us a new ability, because now we're introduced to this storage. We said it was blob storage, and it's actually a special kind of blob storage. Okay, so it is actually Azure Data Lake storage, okay, but V2. Okay, so you've got to look at the second gen Azure Data Lake store, and that's essentially what it is, which is an HDFS sort of compliant storage, and it's capable of scaling to, I'm not actually sure what the top end, but it's pretty much in the petabytes. So this is large amounts of data that we can store within our data lake. And this is going to give us a really exciting new opportunity, because Power Query is fantastic for ingesting simple data flows. We can allow business users to go and connect to their data, they can shape and cleanse their data, and then they can use it. But as organizations get larger and their data management needs become more complex, they need tools that sort of give them additional opportunity, additional functionality. And this is really, because we're using Azure Data Lake storage, essentially we can use the rest of the Azure ecosystem that can integrate with this data lake storage to do a lot of this processing for us. So for example, we can use Azure Data Lake Analytics, okay, to basically shape and aggregate our data. We can use Azure Data Factory, which is a sort of cloud-born ETL tool, if you want to sort of phrase it that way. We can use things like Azure SQL databases and Azure SQL DW, okay? So these are traditional tools, maybe using something like a Polybase to extract data. And finally, we can use Databricks. So Databricks is a sort of new tool provided by the guys who brought us Spark. And this is going to allow us to use pretty much any language that we want. So we can use SQL, we can use Python, we can use R, we can use all of these tools to be able to manage our ETL framework. So we've got this rich end-to-end sort of tooling where we can source data and shape it and make it available to our users in a transparent way, because the end user wouldn't need to know how to use any of these tools. In fact, they don't even need to know that the Azure Data Lake storage layer actually exists. All right, so before we get going with the practical, Okay, I'm just going to tell you exactly what we're going to do today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new workspace. And the reason for doing that is that data flows are confined to a workspace. So at the moment, the way they're managed is through Workspace. So if you want to grant access, okay, so if somebody needs to read from that data flow, then you would need to grant them read access to the workspace. And if you would like them to be able to create data flows or refresh them, then they would need administrator level accesses. Okay, we're then going to go and create a workflow. We're going to create two entities. There's one standard entity and one custom entity. So the standard entity is using the well-defined schemas that we had in our from the CDM, and the custom entity is that extensible model that we spoke about, where we can go and create our own entities for things that Microsoft hasn't defined. Okay, we're then going to go and save and refresh our data flow. We can open up our data flow to connect to it, and then finally we can have a look at some of the administration options. So to do that, I'm going to open up my Power BI Center. I'm going to go and create a brand new workspace. I'm going to call this, this is the Business Analytics virtual chapter, and I'm just going to go and create my workspace. Okay, so I have my new workspace. I'm just going to skip this process, and this is the portal as you know it, except for one little thing. Okay, so we've got this new item over here called Dataflows. Now again, remember that this is in private preview. So if you go looking for this functionality, you won't see it right now, okay? But it is coming. So I'm just going to go click on the new workflow. Obviously, I do not have any workflows because this is a brand new workspace. So we're going to go and say create. We're going to go and create a brand new data flow. I'm going to go add a new entity. And so here I am in my new entity portal, and this is the Power Query Online experience. Okay, so it's still in development, and you'll notice that we have many of the data connectors that we have in the desktop version, but not all just yet. They are striving to get parity with the desktop version. Obviously, we'll see how that goes and exactly when it'll be released. But this experience is going to be very similar. So for my first entity, I'm going to go and get a list of products, okay, and I'm going to suck this in from an Azure SQL database. So I have a database that is sitting in Azure. Okay, there's my database. I've got a database. It already remembers my credentials, and because I'm using Azure database, I don't need to use the gateway. I'm going to select next. And this is going to bring up the navigator. Again, exactly like what we see in the desktop experience. I'm just going to select on the product side. You'll see we get a preview, exactly like the desktop version. I can go next. All right, and this brings us into that sort of Power Query. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and rename this. So I'm going to give it the name products, and I'm going to go and shape my data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this portion because this is exactly what you know. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and get rid of a whole bunch of columns from the back of this file for a couple of reasons. One, sort of obviously Power Query wouldn't support things like binaries and other complex sort of data types. And two, they're really not needed. So I'm going to say, so let's go and delete. I'm going to remove columns. Okay, so there we've done some amount of shaping. And what we're going to do now is we want to go and map this to an entity. So I've mentioned that we know that products is a standard entity. So you'll notice that there's an option here that you're not going to find in your desktop experience. It's called map to standard. So I'm going to select the map to standard, and it's going to ask me which entity type do I want to map to. Okay, and that comes back to our common data model. As we browse down, you'll see that we've got the sort of 100 or so objects that we had in Power Query, in the CDM. And I'm going to select a product, and you'll see that it's now sort of exposed all the columns that we get within the CDM entity. Now, this is a bit like an experience in SSIS where you have a source and a destination sort of adapters, and you would then just go and map them. Now, Power BI does do a lot of the mapping for you. So you'll notice that I had a product called product number. So it's mapped a product called product number. I also have some products like price. Now, I don't have a column called price. Instead, what it's called, it's list price. Okay. So where you need to modify the columns individually, you can do so, and get that mapping. Where we don't have a column, we're just going to leave it as none. Okay, because we just don't have that data. So the entity description has already been filled in for us because we're using the common data model. I'm simply going to click OK. Okay, and we've now gone and mapped our data to standard. One of the things we can do in our Power Query, exactly like we can do in desktop, is actually go and see what this looks like within M. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly copy this out into something that's a little bit larger for you guys. And you can see that we've got this new sort of M notation for this CDM map over here, the CDM map to entity. Okay, and that is just the M code for the transformation that we performed. And you can see that we're mapping the product ID, which is of type text, to the appropriate column. Okay, so now you're not required to sort of understand this in any way, but it is nice to see this happening. Okay, so I'm happy with my entity. Okay, I have defined a couple of columns for it. I'm going to click done, and you'll notice that I've now got a new entity within my data set. Now, I told you that we were going to go and create two entities. So this is a standard entity of type product. I'm going to go and create a brand new entity, and this time, so I'm going to click add entity. It's going to start the new query again. And one of the things that we're going to look to do is we've already gone and put in a lot of time and effort into creating these definitions for our data. So chances are this code exists. So why go and recreate the wheel? We spoke about trying to get rid of duplication of work and inefficiencies. So instead, what we can do is we can go to existing reports. Okay, and this is a very trivial report where I have exchange rates. I'm quickly going to go into the definition for this sort of table. I'm just going to go to the advanced editor. I can grab the M code right out of this. I'm going to go back into my Power Query, and I'm going to go use a blank query, simply paste my data, and I can say next. Okay, so I've been able to reuse the work that I already have out of existing database projects, and I'm going to incorporate that into my data flow. So I'm just quickly going to supply the credentials, as this is a public site. Okay, anonymous is just fine. Okay, and now what I've done here, just to explain the data set a little bit, is I've connected to a GitHub site. Okay, now I'm using GitHub to pull my currency amounts, and I'm sure many of you are probably freaking out that idea because we should not be connecting to GitHub. GitHub is not exactly an authoritative source on anything, and we wouldn't want to be pulling things like currency rates out of GitHub. And this is probably a good example of what your users are doing and why you want to make these curated data sets available to them. Okay, so it's a case of sort of do as I say and not do as I do. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go and give this a name. I'm going to call it exchange rate. Did not want to do that. What happened there? Okay, so I have my two objects. You'll notice this time I did not go through to the map to standard option. Okay, that's because I want to use a custom entity this time. So this is something I've created. If you go through the common data model, you'll actually see that there is an entity for exchange rates, but I just want to show you that there are two options. So we're going to go and create those two options. We're going to load them up. Okay, so now we've created two brand new entities. You'll see that we've got our products and we've got an exchange rate. We're going to go and save. Now we're going to go and give it a name, and you want to make this name obviously useful to your business. I'm going to call it my sales data. Okay, and just get a description. Obviously, you'd probably want to be a little bit more descriptive in with your production work, and we're going to click save. Once we've saved it, we've got two options. Okay, so we can refresh the data now, and then we can create a refresh schedule. I'm just going to refresh the data for now. Okay, and what this is doing is this is essentially this is like saying close and apply on your Power Query data. So I'm going to open up a brand new instance of Power BI that I have pre-warmed up here. It's just a straight empty set that has nothing attached to it. And we want to go and ingest this data, okay? So we're going to go to the get data. And if you are already on the September release, you'll notice that there is an option here for the Power BI Dataflow. This is a good indication that Microsoft are getting ready to go live with this product, okay? So we're going to select this connector. It's going to warn you to tell you that this is still a preview adapter, okay? We're happy with that for now, and we're going to connect it. Now this is the bit of the demo that sort of ends up being a little bit underwhelming, and for good reason, because we don't want essentially what we're experiencing now is as an end user would see it. So an end user is going to browse to the data that they want. Okay, there is my sales data. I'm going to expand that if it loads. Okay, here you can see my two entities. I can click on them. I will get a preview. Okay, so I'm just going to go and select those two items of data, and we're going to say load. Okay, now this is not this talk is not about sort of Power Query or generating reports, but what we want to see is that we can connect to these data sets. So these are published up in the cloud. They are managed at an organizational level, but users can consume them. So we've now got that consistent experience happening across our organization. If I just wanted to show you that we actually did have data in here, I can bring on the name, and let's go and find the price. And here I can get essentially the name and the price of all my products. So we've now essentially created our first data flow. We've mapped all of our data from our sources into our new data warehouse, okay, which is the data flow itself. That again resides in a workspace, and users can now go and consume it. Again, in order to manage connectivity, you would have to grant access to the workspace level. Okay. We obviously don't know how this product will evolve, but you will probably find that we will start to get granular sort of access as time goes on. Okay. So what we've done now is we've gone and created our data flow, and we've connected to it, and we've created a report. Okay, so we want to have a look at some of the admin options that are available here. So if I click on the data flow, you'll see the data flow. We have the standard option. So I've got the refresh now option, which I've already done. And then I've got the scheduled refresh. So if I have a look at some of the scheduled refresh options, we can turn on scheduled refresh, and we can set the refresh schedule. Now this will align to the refresh options of your current tenant. So if you're on Pro, that will be 8 times a day, and if you're on Premium, that'll be up to 48 times a day. Okay. You also have the options to obviously set gateway settings where needed, as well as data source credentials. You've got the options to rename, edit. Okay, not particularly exciting. Settings is just setting some of the properties on that data flow. Okay, and what's some of the really one of the more interesting sort of options on the data flow at the moment is Power BI has lacked a sort of development experience. Okay, things like checking code into Power BI has been difficult because the Power BI document itself is a binary that consists of data, metadata, everything, and you don't really want to be checking in that metadata or that data into your source control system. So what we actually have is the ability to export our data flow. So we're going to quickly open that. I'm going to click open. It's going to set to open up the data, select code. I'm just going to quickly go and format this. Okay, so this is my data flow. Okay, as a JSON format. So we'll have a look at some of the entities that make it in there. Let's see if I'm going to get that. Okay. So we begin by some of the basic data, such as the name and the description we gave it. It'll tell you the last time it was modified, as well as some of the processing options. It also tells us our 2 data sets. So here we've got the product entity, as well as the exchange entity. It tells you the query that is sort of binds them, or the query ID for each data set. And you can see here that we have these two data sets. So this is the R that we created to connect to the M that we used to pull our data out of our SQL database. If we browse down, you can see some of the annotations that we have. You have the entities as well as their descriptions. So for the products, we have the product ID, the name, the product. These are the columns along with the data types that we mapped. But most interestingly, if we go down to the bottom of the site, we start to notice that we've got a couple of things here that gives us hints as to what might come. Okay, so the first thing we have here is the blob storage. Okay, I spoke earlier about this data being using the Azure Data Lake storage. Okay, and here we can see where it is currently stored. I don't have control over that blob storage right now, and the good chance that is going to be a premium feature. But as the product evolves, we'll have the ability to modify these blob stores ourselves. Okay. We also have the ideas of partitions. Okay. And partitioning really means that we're going to be able to start doing sort of delta loads into our data sets. And this should sort of streamline a lot of our development experience. Okay. So I'm just going to close that down. Okay, so that sort of covers my demo. I'm just going to sort of go back to my slides. Okay, so we created a data flow. We looked at, we sort of loaded up the report, and then we had a look at some of the admin options. Some of the things I didn't discuss is we saw how we could export the data flow as a JSON file. You also have the ability to import it. However, you can't do that import right now through the GUI. Okay, you have to use the essentially PowerShell and API calls to make to sort of perform those operations. Okay, so before we close off, we just have a look at how licensing might work. Okay, because that's usually what everybody's kind of interested in, and this is all sort of speculation with a little bit of sort of insight that we've seen from things like the Power BI business summit that took place. Okay, so we're expecting that both Pro and Premium will support all of the connectors. One of the limitations, or some of the limitations that we might find in Pro, is that it's only going to allow us to sort of ingest data in serial, versus Premium will support in parallel. And this really has to do with a bit of that sort of minimizing impact, that sort of noisy neighbor. We've also got incremental updates. So we have incremental updates in Premium for Power BI Ready, but we don't have that in Pro, so that will probably be available. We spoke about the refresh schedules of roughly 8 times a day and 48 times a day, and then the storage. So currently, it looks like you'll be given, your storage will come out of your 10 gig allocation. Okay, so if you have 5 gigs of model, then you would have 5 gigs of sort of data flow. And then the premium, in the premium environment, there's obviously a lot more storage, where we have 100 terabytes of storage to the sort of premium nodes. This would be for P1, and that amount would grow as we went from a P1 to a P2 to a P3. But obviously, bear in mind that if we are going to use the Azure Data Lake Store, we don't have to use the sort of provided storage. We would be able to sort of implement our own storage layer, and then we could support pretty much as big as any sort of data layer, any sort of storage could take. So that would be up to many petabytes. All right. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusions. Are there any questions on anything that you've seen that might be able to answer?
Hey, sure, Michael. So there are more than 10 questions I received from various, but we'll take at least 5, and then, those we are not able to answer, we will email them separately. So the first question we have is, how does it different from Azure Data Lake and Dataflow? How does it different from Azure Data Lake?
So do you mean how it's different from Flow or
Yeah.
Azure Data Lake? Okay, so okay, if I interpret that question as how is it different from Azure Data Lake? Well, it is actually using Azure Data Lake. Okay, it's going to be using the second generation, but it is essentially just blob store. What you're going to get over on top of that is obviously all of the self-service functionality that you're going to get through the Power BI portal. Blob storage is difficult for many users. We wouldn't want to give them an experience that required them to understand solutions that require a lot of code. Microsoft often use the term no or low code. So this is a low code option where people can just use drag and drop sort of principle to create these objects. How it's different from Flow is it's actually entirely different from Flow. It has no relation. That is one of the, although they sort of exist in the same sort of product group, obviously, all the Power Apps, Power BI, Flow sit under the same sort of business group in Microsoft, but there is no larger relationship.
Awesome. And can we able to add column in existing data model from a different entity mapper?
So you cannot extend an existing. So you can't take the standard entity and extend it right now. I haven't seen that experience. That is perhaps something that will come. Obviously, with the common data model being open source, there might be opportunity in the future to be able to go and create an additional columns. But the whole part of the point of the common data model in itself is to not basically, if you allow everybody to go and create their own version of that entity, it ceases to be a standard.
Right, right. And how it will be, beneficial versus, what they are doing currently. Like currently, people are using dashboard. I think, this question is a little bit more summary, but, I will just summarize in few words. Like how it is different than our current experience of developing dashboard.
So it's not meant to be a point of divergence. Instead, what it is they're trying to consolidate sort of repeated steps. So we understand that multiple departments are probably doing the same kind of work. And so what this allows us to do is allows somebody like a business analyst to go and create these curated data sets, these data flows, and make them available to the entire business. So we're going to get it's going to be more efficient because we're only going to run it once. Because currently, if we have 5 reports that are refreshing against the same data set, that refresh is happening 5 times. Okay, and that's putting a load onto your operational system that we probably don't want. So that's going to give us an efficiency there, as well as it's going to reduce the amount of rework. So if those 5 different departments don't need to go and extract the data and sort of transform it themselves, then that is essentially saving us 80% of the work in that example. And then the final benefit is just that consistent experience. So we'll have users accessing data in the same way. The sort of cleansing functions and the mapping functions and all of these things have been applied consistently. So at least these reports begin to speak to one another. So these are not things that we didn't have in a data warehouse. I mean, if you have an existing data warehouse, do you need to move to this? Perhaps not. But the product is really aiming itself at probably smaller organizations or perhaps less mature organizations that haven't made that investment into a data warehouse. And that might be justified. Data warehouses can be expensive. They're very prone to failure. Dataflows is a great solution for that small to medium enterprise to sort of get that functionality.
That was really amazing answer. So I will take last question. Will there be a common data model for education industry?
Okay, so when you look at the common data model as it stands, it doesn't support education, but they will. So Microsoft is engaging in a process of identifying and engaging with these particular sectors and generating these standard entities. So we'll see things like education, probably medicine, sort of maybe other industries come on board as well. And as long as there's I guess, a big enough population, if there's a big enough demand, Microsoft would definitely go and map these entities, because there would be immediate value in it.
Sure. Awesome. So we have a few more questions. Probably, Michael, I will email you, and then
Well, if you want, I mean, theoretically, we still have 10 minutes. So if you want to ask them, happy to take them.
Sure. We can. So
Nothing would be.
Sure. One specific question was, in depth. He wants to see how we can add a column in existing data model in where we are using, data flow.
Okay, so if you're going to add a new column, then we're speaking about a custom entity again, and it would be exactly like you would do in Power BI.
Right. For example, if I have a new column and I want to map that in the data flow, is it possible to do that? Once we created the data flow with the map, and suddenly I realized that I need to add one more column, and I need to map that in my data flow. Is it possible?
Yeah, sure. So if we think back to, I think you can still see my screen. You remember that we have essentially a piece of M that defines that that code. We could obviously go and do that mapping manually if we required it, or we could just go and recreate the data flow from scratch. Obviously, recreating work isn't sort of desirable, but when it's as simple as just copying and pasting the M and then just adding an additional piece of code, it's probably not that difficult. So yes, extending, or mapping those columns later is definitely possible.
Awesome.
All right, you got another question there, or are we done?
No, we have, but that question is quite big. I will try to read it. Okay. So, can a dynamic selection between the Power BI dashboard and the connector or a gateway be created so that the user of the data can be dynamically select the server and the database?
So I think where he's perhaps hinting at is something like we can do in the desktop version with parameterization. I have not seen that. I'm not going to say no, because these guys keep surprising us with what they can actually achieve, but I don't think that is possible in the current version.
Okay. And do you know if the data flows are accessible from analytics service? I think it meant to be Azure Analytics Service.
So obviously we can break that down. If you are using the Azure sort of data lake storage, then it would definitely be available, because this is just generic storage. However, when it is in the sort of when you're still using when you're still allowing sort of Power BI to manage those data lakes, I don't think so. Although again, I might be wrong. But I don't think analysis services would be able to connect to it. But that is pure speculation on my side.
Sure. And you already covered this, but the pricing, how the pricing will differ.
So this feature, as we currently understand it, okay, bear in mind it hasn't gone live, and we haven't, and nobody from Microsoft has sort of mentioned this yet, is that it's going to be just an addition to your current subscription. So if you are on Pro, you are going to continue to pay your $10 per user per month, and you will just have this additional benefit. As I understand it, the storage would come out of your quota. Okay, so you won't get an additional 10 gigs. It'll be part of that 10 gigs that you have. Okay, so you might just want to sort of bear that in mind. But yeah, and then premium pricing would remain as is.
All right, this is really a useful session, and you almost covered all the questions now. And thank you for amazing demo and amazing information. So, do you have anything to tell it to audience before we close the session?
No, I think that's it. I mean, obviously, just from my side, I just, if we just want to speculate, we know that data flows are coming soon. We also know that it's Ignite next week, and Microsoft do like surprising us with cool stuff at Ignite. So sort of make a concerted effort to sort of keep your ears open, and maybe there's a nice surprise for us this time next week.
Sure, sure. So, all right. So we will definitely post the video on the YouTube, and at the end of the session, all the candidates will receive the survey. Please try to fill out those survey, and we have give out for those who will be filling the survey. And once again, thanks a lot, Michael, for amazing session. Have a good day.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
Cheers. Bye.